Look at me, I'm inside of a box. Well, a 1977 box, because that's the way TV looked. I figured that would be the way to start this podcast. This is the MTOM podcast. I'm Paul Yeager. We're going back in time. We're going to go back to 1977. June 10th is the first day that you saw John Roach appear on the TV program we now call Market to Market. Back then, Farm Digest. After was also Iowa Farm Digest in Season 1, which was 1975. This is an episode from Season 2 in June. So this is the first time we see John Roach on the TV show. So Jimmy Carter was president, inflation was starting to flare, and the farm crisis was looming. We just didn't know exactly all of those parts. I want you to watch a couple things in this episode. I want you to look at the graphics to see how time has gone and changed. You'll see the market analysis is up front, and then you're going to see some of the stories. I want you to watch some of the stories. We're going to talk about housing. That'll be a thing in this story, so make sure you watch that. I want to let you know, yes, we had Buy For Me the Rain as the theme music for the show. I'm not putting it on there so we can put it on YouTube because there is a lot of time that song would be on. So that's why so many of you know the show Buy For Me the Rain by the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band as being associated with this program. It's because it was on for so long. So that's what you're going to see here in this installment of the MTOM podcast.
Farm Digest with Chet Randolph. Produced Friday, June 10th.
Hello, I'm Chet Randolph. This is Farm Digest. Welcome back. Last December, we took a two-part look at the quality of life in rural America. We talked about the problems that lie behind the picture postcard beauty of many of our small towns and the rural countryside. Well, this week, we're going to do the same, but this time with the USDA's new Assistant Secretary for Rural Development, Alex McCurry. Since our first report last December, the problems in rural America haven't gotten any better. There still are 5 times as many people per doctor in the country as compared to the cities. Over 5,000 towns in rural America don't even have a physician. 47% of our country's poor live in small towns and rural areas, but they receive only 27% of federal welfare and poverty payments. Ironically, amidst all the bounty of agriculture, one of the most serious problems confronting the rural poor is undernutrition and hunger. The list could go on, because historically, the problems of low-income rural residents have been compounded by the popular belief that rural life was the good life. The problems of rural folks weren't visible, and therefore they simply didn't exist. Big city problems were visible, and they received the federal government's attention and its money. Later on, we'll be talking with Alex McCurry about all of this. But before we do, we want to turn, as usual we do at this time, to this week's commodity markets with market analyst John Roach of the Farmers Grain and Livestock Corporation. And John, with low subsoil moisture, how much lower is this corn going?
Well, Chet, it surprised me in how far it's sold off this past week. I don't think we'll see too much further decline before we see it start to recover.
We've got some other pressures on it, like wheat, but it should rally unless we get a lot of rain.
Well, at this point, the market seems to be watching the weather forecast a little closer than they are the crop development. Unless we see substantial moisture, you can expect a rally out of these price levels.
If you were a cattle or hog feeder, would you be buying corn ahead as much as you can?
I sure would be. From this point here, I think a man can be comfortable owning corn at these prices to carry him all the way into the new crop.
Okay, before we go any farther, John, let's see how the markets did this week. There were horrendous losses in all the grains and livestock this week, the like of which we've seldom seen. There were limit down moves in beans, meal, oil, cattle, bellies, and hogs. Many bought corn Monday with a forecast of no rain for 5 days. Scattered showers came, and the forecast of rain for this weekend caused heavy liquidation, dropping prices 15 cents in 4 days to the lowest level in 4 years. In beans, add to the rain forecast a complete lack of buying in Europe for 2 weeks. Those who bought the dry forecast Monday, thinking they were heading back to their highs, were disillusioned and got out, causing prices to plummet almost $1 in 1 week. Worry about cattle forced off dry pastures started selling in the cattle Monday. Stops were hit and they went limit down. Lack of retail buying hit a market already battered technically, causing cattle to drop $1 under the previous contract low, down $3.50 in a week. Well, John, do you think that we've overdone it on the future side, or are the fundamentals that bad on the livestock?
Well, temporarily we're running into a problem where we've got too much meat that we're trying to move in the grocery store, and it's simply not moving as quickly as what they would like to see it.
Just not the demand there, it seems.
It seems like it's just backed away in the last 30-day period of time, quite surprisingly to a lot of people. I do think, like what you're saying, however, that the futures market is maybe tending to overdo it just a bit because the cash market is not looking quite that serious.
How about the beans? Have we overdone that too, or are they really that bad?
Well, you can look back last year and there was a $2 sell-off on soybeans in the month of July, and they came right back in August. We could be seeing the very same thing this year, where after having an exciting market in April and seeing the early highs, now we're seeing somewhat of a disappointed type market as people start to bail out.
Do we have to, what do we watch for? Buying in Europe, I suppose, cash meal prices, what those sort of things do we watch for?
Well, the number one thing to watch for, of course, is the weather conditions.
Yeah. Right.
Beyond that, I think that the export business is particularly crucial. The Brazilians are selling aggressively now in advance of our new crop harvest, and will most likely continue to do so. So that's something to watch also.
How about on the new crop? Do you think that we're going to see some more down, or have we seen pretty well the correction here?
It looks at this point we've probably seen most of the down that the market's going to have. I would expect to see some recovery back, and I think another move back toward the upside before we get through these summer months.
What do you hear about other areas of the U.S. like the Mid-South on beans?
The Mid-South right now has got some problems because they haven't received the rainfall that normally they would be during this time of the year. But other than the Mid-South, the moisture pattern seems to be spotty more than any general type of a description.
But you think there's enough of a chance for an up that you wouldn't suggest a fellow contract any more beans now if he's already got some contracted?
If an individual's got some contracted, no. However, if he does not have any contracted, I think he has to be a little quicker at the trigger than what he has been here in the past couple of months.
Yeah, and how about for the feeder again, as we said on corn? What about on the meal side? Would you be laying in some even new crop meal now at these prices or not?
Well, at these kind of price levels, I think meal is probably a better purchase relative than corn. As far as going on out into the new crop, I'd be a little cautious there, but I certainly would cover my needs through the summer months.
Thank you, John. One of the most serious problems facing rural America today is housing. The federal government currently supports several programs designed to encourage the flow of housing construction money into rural areas. One of those programs operating in several areas of the country is called self-help housing. Bill Hanley took a look at this rather unusual program and filed this report.
The concept involved in self-help housing is really very simple. Several low to moderate income families, all wishing to live in the same rural community, are organized by a local housing assistance group. Utilizing Farmers Home Administration financing, the families are offered low-interest loans toward the purchase of their own brand-new homes. The catch is that the families must build the homes themselves. And so, working together, the families, including husbands, wives, and children over 16, attend planning sessions, construction classes, and eventually begin the actual building process under the supervision of a professional housing contractor. Working both winter and summer, the projects are usually completed within 5 to 8 months. One such project, made up of 5 single-family homes, is located in the small eastern Wisconsin town of Oakfield, 8 miles southwest of Fond du Lac. The Oakfield Housing Project, which stands on the extreme western edge of town, was begun back in December of last year and is now virtually complete. Having finished work on the interior of the homes, several families have already moved in, while continuing to work on landscaping and garage construction. The first to move in was Sid Martin and his family, and he can remember the hard work and long hours that went into building his home.
Well, we started on the foundations probably about a week, 2 weeks, maybe about a month later, and the problem there was with the frost. And they would dig the hole, and then there was too much frost and they couldn't get going, and then they put the forms and they couldn't pour it because it was too cold. And we had, I don't know, almost 2 months there of weather where it was never above 32 degrees. And they said they wouldn't pour unless it was above 18. So there were very few days in there where it got above 18, but when they did pour, it was a start. Oh, I learned a lot. Yeah, it was a real challenge. It was a real challenge. And it was a lot of fun, and it was a pain, and it was a problem. And you talk to so many people that build a house, and they say, if I had to do over again, I'd never do it. And you never understand why until you do it. And when you get into it, you've got so many things you got to do. For every one project you finish, you start about 3 more. And it seems like it never ends.
While the Oakfield project may have been a challenge for the participants, It was a challenge of a different sort for the people of Oakfield. As in almost any rural community of under 1,000 residents, newcomers are viewed with some degree of suspicion. And especially last year, when it came down to the village board deciding whether low-income housing units should be allowed on the town's outskirts, questions were bound to be raised.
Well, according to their specifications that they had drawn up, the applicants were supposed to have reasonably good credit ratings and so forth, and several of the applicants had arrest records, and some of them apparently even had unpaid bills that that the county people had contacted them on, and so on and so forth. You know, I'd say that their credit rating just wasn't quite like it should have been according to the contract. And when we did talk to the members of Self-Help Housing Office on this stuff, they assumed that they had been screened, but the screening was done by a different office.
But even after self-help housing officials improved their screening process and presented the village board with a new list of applicants, the Oakfield Village Fathers continued to have concerns over such federally supported housing.
We didn't want all these places to look alike. We didn't want it to be a development of identical cracker boxes or something like that, you know. So they did consent to using different styled homes, and that was used in the program. We would have preferred to have garages on all units.
Well, initially, as in most rural communities, there is a fair amount of conservatism. A lot of them are from the German background. They don't believe in any sort of assistance. They believe in themselves. We tried to point out the fact that our program goes along the same concept. This country was built on the idea of a person helping themselves. Look at the old barn raising tradition, and what is closer to it than a program whereby groups of families join together and build houses themselves. They have adequate supervision. We have professional construction supervisors that show them how to build a house, but it's basically the same idea as a bunch of people getting together and throwing up a barn. In this case, it's 5 homes.
Despite those self-help aspects of the project, however, there can be no doubt that it did cost money. The Oakfield units, for example, cost the federal government $2,600 apiece in supervisory and administrative costs, not to mention the expense incurred through the issuance of low-interest loans. But there are also benefits, hidden benefits enjoyed by any rural community whenever construction occurs and new residents move in. Benefits which can sometimes spell the difference between poverty and prosperity for rural residents and businesses.
5 homes, appraised at anywhere from $25,000 to $30,000. That's a substantial amount of tax base to be adding to a community, and can only help to keep taxes down somewhat. Another aspect is in the economic end of it. There are stores here, there's a bank here, there's a grocery store, whatever, and just the proximity of living here in Oakfield, they'll be adding money to the community in that respect.
So, perhaps not surprisingly, the attitudes of some of Oakfield's leaders have apparently turned more positive since the new residents actually began moving in. And there seems to be optimism on the part of both community officials and the families involved that the village of Oakfield will eventually be benefited by self-help housing.
They would definitely be an asset to the community, I would say, because young people usually get involved, if they're interested, they'll get involved in community projects, and I'm not real sure but they're always looking for volunteer firemen in this village, and maybe we can interest some of them in that work.
Oh, I would think so. I would hope any community would want to bring in people and their tax money and children, and especially if the people are good, and I feel I'm as good as anybody, or better, you know. And I think that's the way you got to feel. And as long as I'm accepted within the community, I'll do everything I can to help it.
And so the proponents of self-help housing believe they have found a program that works. Works not only to help moderate-income American families move into decent and affordable housing with a sense of pride and accomplishment, but which also works to bring an economic and social lift to rural school systems, rural businesses, and to the very quality of rural life. I'm Bill Hanley.
There's no easy solution for improving and preserving the quality of rural life. Projects like the one that Bill Hanley reported on are just one way of increasing the options that rural people have for improving their lives. Alex McCurry, newly appointed Assistant Secretary for Rural Development, understands the need for creating more of those options for rural people. He's also an enthusiastic proponent of self-help housing. As Assistant Secretary, Mr. McCurry is responsible for the Farmers Home Administration, the Rural Electrification Administration, REA, and the Rural Development Service. He stated that one of his first priorities is to provide realistic options for more rural Americans, which would require a minimum amount of paperwork and processing. Mr. McCurry, why is it that the Carter administration's budget didn't include funding for self-help programs such as the one at Fond du Lac?
Well, the principal reason was that the recommendations that were made last year by a previous administration were just slightly modified right after the Carter administration took over, without a great deal of time to really look at the choices that were being either added or subtracted from the recommendations. And these were basically all submitted before any of the assistant secretaries who had the key administrative responsibilities came on board.
So you've been talking to Mr. Berglund about the need for this kind of funding?
A number of additions have been made in terms of the recommendations we've asked OMB to approve that we ask Congress to reinstitute into the budget. Essentially, we're reacting to the Congress's action on their legislative appropriations. And we've asked that several pieces of the act be supported.
And you're very enthusiastic about this self-help type program.
Yes, I personally have been involved in initiating the only program that exists in New Mexico several years ago.
Before you came with the department?
Yes.
So now it's a matter of getting funding?
That's right. We also have to improve the way that the programs are administered and managed, both on our side and on the side of the local groups who operate them.
And this is one area of concern, isn't it, that it seems that in several times in inquiring on this, there is an understaffing, just an inability to physically get it done out in the local offices.
That's one of the major problems that I think generally operates for all of the programs. That Farmers Home Administration is right now at the employment levels of 1971 or 72. At the same time, our program responsibilities have expanded tremendously. I think we've probably had a threefold increase in both dollars and variety of programs since 72, and yet the same number of people are essentially having to carry on those responsibilities.
Have you had another problem possibly that many of those people that were hired to do the work at the time in the, let's say, 10 years ago, many were working primarily with farmers and making farm loans, and now suddenly they're thrust into an area with which they're not as acquainted. Has there been enough training program to accomplish this?
Yeah, we've done a considerable amount of training. We've got a relationship with Oklahoma to provide training in a variety of the programs. We've done training locally, and I think that probably is fairly well handled. I think that one looks at how the department and the employees, particularly at the local level, have pretty effectively distributed resources and gotten the programs going. I think that what we have to do is clarify our priorities so that they understand that there are some elements that of the program that are very important in terms of the broad rural development purpose that the department has been made responsible for.
Do we see quite a bit of it where most people favor improved quality of life in rural America, and yet they say we've got to watch the budget? And here we come right down to the crunch then all the time.
That's the perennial argument in the federal government.
Yeah.
Then everybody says, we have given you the responsibility for rural development, Mr. Secretary of Agriculture, and it's your responsibility to get it done. Then one gets at the question, how much is it going to take? Mm-hmm. Well, I think one of the things that is misunderstood is that, for example, the Farmers Home Administration, which is about $7.5 billion now, in terms of dollar authorization. However, only a few of those programs are actually federal dollars that are spent. For example...
You mean they're loans? Or what?
Practically all are loans. Yeah. Only a small proportion of the programs that we make are grants. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not saying that those are subsidies. Those are public investments in public purposes. So they're legitimate grants.
Well, now then
then we've got interest subsidies. And those are essentially, in a sense, a subsidy, okay? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Could I explore that just a second?
Yeah.
Why is it that it seems that on the average here, according to a Pennsylvania study anyway, that the interest rates on metro loans were about 13% with 25-year payback, where in the rural areas they average more like 20% with a 15-year payback, which seems a little discriminatory.
I don't know what that interest
This was a Pennsylvania study.
In terms of housing loans, or?
Yes, and showing that rural housing loans simply weren't as favorable. Now again, it's an attitude.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do about this attitude? Again, you know, we've got several other figures that indicate that the rural areas have 30% of the population, and yet we don't have the medical service, we don't have the transportation, we don't have that area. What can we do that the U.S. is aware of it?
Well, one of the things that I think we have to do is take seriously part of the Rural Development Act, which says that the Secretary of Agriculture has responsibility for assuring that other public investments of the federal government and local government are coordinated to improve the quality of life in rural communities.
Mm-hmm.
That includes those expenditures by the federal government which contribute to the delivery of medical care so that rural residents can have access to it. It also includes some problems that affect many rural communities. The decline of the secondary road system and the support for that. At the same time that we're also sometimes permitting the elimination of some of those rail lines that are used for transporting commodities and products. For example, we have developed some concern that, as you pointed out, by one interpretation, 40% of the people live in rural areas.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
By another, it's 30.
Okay.
But regardless of that, a very small proportion of the public housing money has in fact been delivered to small towns. And we need to target more effectively and identify those areas that have serious need and assure that we get the housing there.
At least one study says 60% of the substandard housing is in the rural areas.
That's right. Actually, in 1970, I believe, 60% of the housing is in rural areas, or 1965. Now it's about 50%, but when you consider that 50% of the substandard housing in this country is in rural areas, but only 40% of the people, there's a disproportionate need for housing, and yet the allocation of those resources has not found its way there.
I guess what can we do again here now? We see that in the state of Wisconsin, where we did the film work, that they have 900 loan applications pending for farmers. What can we do? There seems to be a backlog which is hard to catch up on.
In the entire state?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that probably breaks down to maybe somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 or 12 per county.
Yeah.
Now,
is this kind of customary in other states?
No. We've got a particular problem in a number of states because of the drought and weather issues. The emergency loan activity has built up the volume much heavier than it would have been otherwise. And we have attempted to move in resources where we're told that the backlogs are getting heavier than they ought to be. We had that kind of problem in Minnesota. We've got that worked down to some 300 or 400 loans backlog, and that's a fairly kind of current level.
Now, you've said that you wanted to simplify the process of getting this work done, because you want to see it done.
That's right.
What have you been able to do to simplify government forms?
Well, in one case, so far, we developed the weatherization loan program, which I think I may have told you when we had lunch in Washington. It's one-page application, and it's only one side. The other side is a note, the instrument itself. This may be the simplest federal form in existence.
Congratulations to you. Now, you said that you want to give more options to the local community so that you don't have a rigid proposal for towns all over the country.
That's right.
What have you been able to do to give us that option and yet have some control over it?
Well, it's really has to get back down to training of people first.
Yeah.
I think we need to develop a training program, number one, that makes people knowledgeable of the choices that are available through Farmers Home, as well as other federal agencies. I'll give you an example of housing. It's too easy sometimes to focus on rental subsidy programs, and they become fairly easy to get out there. But I think it's important for people to improve their ability to own. But we've got a variety of programs which all are necessary in a community in housing. But in some communities, you need more rental housing than in others. In others, you ought to emphasize probably the self-help housing program.
How do you involve the local community in this decision-making?
Well, fortunately, I think as we develop an operational philosophy with the department, with Farmers Home, the fact that we're organized at a county level and at a state level permits us to work more closely with entities of local government and state government. That's one of the major goals we're after.
Are you saying it's primarily an attitude that comes down from you as the boss?
Well, me and the secretary and whoever else, to recognize that to the extent that we're able to cooperate with state and local government, to that extent we're able to also bring our priorities and local priorities closer together so that federal programs are really solutions to local problems, not federal solutions to local problems.
Let's again tackle what we can do. In the cities, you have riots, a lot of rock throwing, and you get something done, it seems. But out in the rural areas, there are no riots, and nobody seems to notice. And yet we've got the problems with transportation, with crime, with medical, with housing, even poor diets in an area rich with food. What do we do to really get funding comparable to the city area?
Well, I don't know if it's
not
all
just funding, but funding. I mean, no, not just funding, but
the development of resources
and attitude.
You know, I think that right now rural areas don't have such serious problems in crime yet. There are some pockets of malnutrition.
Yep.
We have symptoms, you know, like an increasing crime rate, accident rate, things like that, of problems, and we ought to use those early warning signals to make sure that we develop policies that assist local people in solving their own problems. To the extent that I think we give people the resources that permit them to deal with their own resource needs, I think to that extent we prevent the growing of social problems which later cost us money to recover.
And aren't we talking here that when farmers do well, when the rural community is attractive, we have less problems in the city?
I don't think there's any doubt. The publication came out recently from the Southern Regional Conference, which, by the way, President Carter served on, Secretary of Labor Marshall served on, and Secretary of Commerce Krebs served on, identifies that the neglect of rural communities, to a large extent, created many of the problems of inner cities.
Well, now, let me ask you, Secretary Marshall of Labor is a specialist in rural jobs. Are you and he coordinating?
Oh, yes. Next week, he, or a couple of his people, my counterparts in the Labor Department, will be spending a couple of days together looking and discussing in rural communities and discussing opportunities for cooperation at the same time that we're looking at rural communities. And I think this is very important. Sometimes we sit at the esoteric level in Washington, but it becomes more meaningful when we get to planning right there in town.
In the last minute, we're worried about young people in the cities who have trouble with jobs and they get into trouble without jobs. But in the rural areas, we find 1 out of 6 boys looking for work, even though we always think there's plenty of work on the farm. Have we got something going in this area?
Oh, yes. Our business and industry program is going great guns.
What do you mean by that?
The guarantee for industry to locate in rural communities for expansion of current or existing business or for the development of new businesses, where we provide guarantees for loans to those people who want to start businesses. And in fact, it's working very well.
Sounds encouraging. Now, the National Advisory Council on Women's Educational Programs said that many rural women don't realize the opportunities that may be available to them besides being the homemaker and the farm help wife if they want to be. But again, there's many non-farmers out in the rural area.
That's right.
Do you have a program that's helping the wives to get into some areas they might want to go?
You know, it's very interesting. The unemployment rates don't show that kind of lack of job opportunity. And I think that the diversification of job choices in rural towns and places is important in terms of those people that need second jobs for women who don't have a full-time.
And you have some program that is beginning to work in the direction of showing them the opportunities?
We're hoping that the whole business and industry and diversification of jobs will accomplish that. We need to work more closely with Extension Service, for example, as it moves into those community development activities.
And can we expect the President himself to give us more support in terms of funding in this area? I don't mean this the women, I mean this whole rural development.
The whole rural development. I think what the President will do, and we're undertaking now at his request an analysis of rural development goals, is define a national rural policy which will put a foundation on the kinds of things we need to do.
Thank you. There's a lot more we'd like to talk about, but that's our time. Thank you, Mr. McCurry, Assistant Secretary. And that's it for Farm Digest this week. On our next edition, we'll be focusing on an issue that concerns both farmers and consumers, and that is agriculture and energy. How will we continue to produce enough food at a reasonable price as energy gets more expensive and more scarce? Well, we'll find out next week. Till then, I'm Chet Randolph. Thanks for joining us, and have a good week.
And as you heard John Roach talk about this first appearance, it was on the episode, the Market Plus, when he was on in August of 2025, and then in that episode where we recorded with 11 of our analysts in a recent MTOM podcast. So that's kind of fun to hear. So anyway, thanks for watching. If you like something else you want to make comments, send it to me in an email at markettomarket@iowapbs.org. Thank you so much for being a part of this program for more than 50 years.